We'd like to introduce you to our Mexican gypsy, Michelle, Mama Michelle. And our psychedelic mushroom, Mama Cass.
It's my distinct duty to introduce to you the gentlemen members of our organization, Papa Denny Doherty. And last, but certainly not least, the gentleman who writes all of our original material and a good portion of the material that we steal. A fine man, a great musician, and a hell of an American, John Phillips.
By 1965, there had been a shift in music. The British invasion saw American groups lose their dominance over rock and roll, but music was changing direction. The psychedelic movement was on the rise, LSD was on the rise.
There's nothing grown up or sophisticated in taking an LSD trip at all. They're just being complete fools.
The Byrds had emerged from Los Angeles with a cover of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man. The jangly, heavily compressed sound of Roger McGuinn's 12-string guitar embodied the psychedelic movement in California. At the same time, another group were forming. Like the Byrds, they sang in harmony, played jangly guitars, and embraced the hippie lifestyle. Unlike the Byrds, the Mamas and the Papas image was a truer representation of California. McGuinn and Clark were attempting to emulate the British look. Chris Hillman had ironed his curly hair straight, and Michael Clark had only been added to the lineup because he looked like Brian Jones. The Mamas and the Papas couldn't have looked any different from their British counterparts. I did, of course, say image-wise because musically they were massively inspired by the Beatles, more so than the Byrds. Mama Cass loved John Lennon, and Beatles covers would appear on their albums. They were together all of 3 years before dissolving. This is the story of their first album. Mamas and the Papas' first album debuted in 1965. The title, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, came from the way they looked.
There's this new group that Lou Adler has booked, the Mamas and Papas. He said, "You seen them?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Can't put them on, they look weird." I said, "But everybody looks weird these days."
Lou Adler, a record producer, remembered being shocked by both their appearance and how they sounded. It was him who had coined the phrase. By 1965, the Mamas and Papas had been looking to get signed and auditioned for Lou Adler. They appeared at Western Studios looking scruffy and wasted, dressed in jeans and t-shirts. Adler took them into Studio 2 and they played him California Dreamin' and Go Where You Wanna Go. He asked if they had any more and they played him half of the first album right on the spot. The acoustics in Studio 2 was so good, John Phillips later said, when he played his 12-string guitar, it sounded like an orchestra.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew that if this group ended up on my label and that I was producing them, that we were going to do something really special. After the audition was over, he asked John Phillips what he wanted, to which he replied, "We want a steady stream of money from your office to our house."
Hi, my John. What we really want is a steady stream of money from your office to our house.
I said, I want a constant stream of money from your office to our house.
Michelle Phillips didn't trust Lou at first. She later stated, "We grew to love him in about 10 minutes. After that, he asked them to come and see him the next day. They thought there'd be another audition, but when they entered the next day, the room was full of contracts. Lou offered them a deal with Dunhill Records, proclaiming, 'I am the record company.' Lou Adler, in fact, jointly owned Dunhill Records with his partners. John immediately began negotiation tactics. He stated, "Well, we've got another deal going and somebody is looking at us." That day, John negotiated a house for them in West Hollywood, an old car, a black 61 Buick convertible, and $1,500 cash. That's the equivalent to $36,000 today.
He said $1,500, and I mean, I swallowed because I expected something, much more than that from what I was seeing and hearing.
He got us a house right away, a car right away, everything, charge accounts right, every place right away.
With the contract signed, they moved into the house on Floor Street. It was decaying and painted green. They quickly named it the Greenhouse. It was in this house the cover photo for If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears was taken. The picture was snapped in the bathroom with the four sitting in the bath. They had in fact been up all night. When the photo sessions began, pictures were taken in the garden before they all disappeared up to the bathroom and sat in the bath. They weren't posing, that's exactly how they were sat. The photographer came upstairs, snapped the pictures, and it became their album cover. The toilet was also in the frame, which was controversial at the time, as you were not allowed to show a toilet on a record cover. At this period of their lives, they were broke kids living from day to day. The picture represented this well. Recording for the album began October of '65 at Western Studios. The studio was just over 3 miles from their house. Western was a favourite of both Phil Spector and Brian Wilson. Studio 3 in Western was so small they were forced to do the tracks first and vocals later, as you couldn't fit many people in there at once. To record, they either used Studio 3 or Studio C when recording. The only actual musician in the group was John, so a group of session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew played their backing tracks. The drum and guitar parts were recorded on a Shure 546 and the vocals were recorded on an RCA DX77 microphone. For the vocal effects, they used reverb from Studio 3's live chamber, an EMT plate being recorded to the vocal tracks, and compression from a 1176 compressor limiter prototype. A lot of reverb was used on the vocals, which was common with the 60s sound. Engineer Dayton Howe later stated, "When you laid the reverbs on each vocal pass, you got this wonderful sparkling sound from the phasing in the chamber. We didn't plan these things, we discovered them as we went along." With a 4-track recorder, they were forced to bounce tracks to fit everything in. They used a 4-track Ampex 300 recorder. The layout ended up as follows: Track 1 female vocals, Track 2 guitars and piano, Track 3 male vocals, and Track 4 bass and drums. As Lou Adler began to work with them, he also started dressing like them too. This was quite common with him. Once he produced an artist, he got fully involved with them and took on their characters. John Phillips, the leader of the band, oozed charisma. He pushed them to their limits. They would rehearse each song with just John playing acoustic guitar and his arrangement with each vocal. He later said, "If it doesn't sound like a full record with 1 guitar and 4 voices, it never will. That's the key. You can't rely on other instruments to pick up the slack for you. It's not an instrument thing, it's a vocal thing." In the studio, nothing was ever good enough for John. He forced Michelle to do more vocal takes, and when she complained saying it sounds fine, he replied, "No it doesn't, you're flat." Michelle later admitted that's why everything sounds so great.
Yeah, I pushed everyone to the limits. But there's probably 1,000 other groups in the world recording the same night. And yours had better be the best.
They belted out the sounds as loud and powerful as possible. It often left Denny trying to catch his breath, and Cass once fainted. John himself was quite embarrassed about his singing and never wanted to sing lead. Lou Adler later stated, "He was one of the best vocal arrangers ever." The whole time John recorded, he was high on a combination of speed and acid. At this point, the group were well into LSD, especially John. he could function reasonably well on it, except during the initial rush. That lasted an hour, and all he did was laugh. Midway through the recording, John discovered Michelle was having an affair with Denny and moved out of the greenhouse to a place in Lookout Mountain Road in Laurel Canyon. Michelle actually moved with him. John's main priority was the band, and he didn't want anything to destroy that just as they were taking off. In fact, Cass was more hurt by the affair. She loved Denny, and it caused her deep pain and distress.
He was just God to her. And when he had an affair with Michelle, it just really hurt Cass very, very badly, you know.
She said to me, you can have any man you want. Why take the man that I love?
Back in the studio, Lou Adler wanted to experiment with sounds for the album. Rubber Soul had been released and set the tone for that. California Dreamin' featured a flute solo, and they couldn't decide whether to release that or Go Where You Wanna Go for their first single. As the latter was already complete, it was released. In less than a week, Adler changed his mind, stopped the presses, and released California Dreamin' instead. The Mamas and Papas never equaled the performance of the songs recorded on their debut album. Lou Adler later said, "We should have recorded 200 songs for that first album, because their behaviour got worse as they got more famous and successful." For their first album, John was fully leading them and they were all listening to him. When they returned to make their follow-up, it was everyone for themselves, a much more freewheeling attitude. Also, they weren't hurting for cash now, they had a ton of money. They were receiving $500 a week. That's the equivalent to around $5,000 now.
And then just went, then he got a new Cadillac convertible, which owned like a Jags.
As the next album was being recorded, both John and Cass were treating Michelle with disdain. John moved out of the Laurel Canyon home and moved into 1441 Woods Drive with Denny. The future for the Mamas and Papas looked bleak. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you wish to donate, it would be greatly appreciated, as this is my main source of income. Just click the three symbols next to the video, then the thanks icon, and however much you wish to donate. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for my next video.